artists and animators. Fable Siegel is the director behind Lackadaisy, an indie animated series based on a long-running Eisner-nominated webcomic written and drawn by Tracy Butler. The plot follows the rise and fall of the Lackadaisy speakeasy as its owner, Mitzi May, pursues unconventional strategies for keeping the struggling speakeasy open. Also, all of the characters are talking cats. Fable joins us to discuss the business and operational side of running an indie production. Welcome, Fable.
Hi. My camera is facing that way, but the screen is that way, so forgive me for going back a little bit.
I think we can work it out. All right, so first, welcome back to the stream, and why don't we talk a little bit, what was your experience like in the animation industry before starting Lackadaisy?
Well, my experience was graduating from USC out of their film animation program, and I was one of the first graduates out of that. Like, it was like only their first or second year of even having a major for that, and that was in 2010, at the height of the recession. So for all you Gen Z, like graduating college and everything is fucked right now. Can I say that? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Where everything's empty right now. It stinks. I'm sorry. But yeah, it was a struggle jumping out into a professional environment where there was very few jobs available. But I reached out to everybody I knew and just kept applying and applying. And eventually, I did get a job as a prop designer and board revisionist over at what was then Mike Young Productions on a bunch of shows that were basically selling toys. They were 22-minute toy commercials. But yeah, there, like, I graduated at USC in Los Angeles, and I just, with a lot of people, many of my school colleagues just kind of like drifted off into other things at that point. But, I kept reaching out to people who I knew online and just talking to them. And some of my good friends, like Ken Turnbull, who's right now one of the episode directors of King of the Hill, the new reboot coming out. So, take a look at that when it pops out. She told me that there was some board artists available over at 6 Point Harness, where she was working at the time, and so I applied and I managed to get into that, and just the whole process of getting jobs in this, just finding out that someone's open somewhere and throwing your stuff there, like knowing something of what they want, trying to, make sure your portfolio has the things that they want, to just keep on throwing it there, and you don't, for every like 10, 20, whatever many things that you throw out there, you're only getting a little responses back. Sometimes you get a board test, for instance, and storyboarding or just any kind of test where they just see if like you can match what they generally do, and you'll do that, and then nothing comes of it. Or you get an interview and nothing comes of it, but you just keep going and going, and eventually you get some stuff. And when you're floating in between jobs, you just pick up clients for any other kind of artwork you can. So you're kind of always running like a small business on the side, or selling your skills. It's either to a studio or it's to individual people. Some conventions, like for instance, if it's not obvious by my attire and this and general involvement, I would go to conventions. I would pick up conventions there. I would show my work online. I would do streams of my work, just sharing with people like what I was doing, how I was doing it, and you gradually build up both a clientele and a reputation among in your field, and work starts to come in, and there's sometimes there's dry spots, and sometimes you're flooded with requests. So you just get really careful about how you use your money, and you just keep building on top of what you had. So, but that's my career basically, is learning how to float in a very stormy kind of field during a time where everything is like shifting underneath me, because like The field didn't to be quite this, disrupted, let's say, but definitely when I got into it, that's when everything got very chaotic, because that's when the streaming wars started. So, and then now we're seeing the fallout of that. So yeah.
Yeah,
that was a long run.
No, I mean, when you talk to like artists who've been in the industry for a long time, like it does come and go. There are like ebbs and flows. There are times when everybody is just looking for work anywhere, and then times when there's just too much work. It would be nice if there was just a steady amount of work. That would be excellent.
Yeah. The nice thing that the current moment has that didn't exist back in 2010 when I was jumping into the field was there was not so many open, known like productions that you could. Indie doesn't pay immediately. Typically, it varies from like basically peanuts to comparable to a studio job. It depends on the production, how much funding they're able to source, and how good they are budgeting. But, it's at least like an opportunity on your portfolio and start like gaining that reputation that can like lead to like other things in the future. And also like, pretty much anyone can start. So if you're like, well, I just want to come out with like this over here, you can always like start doing your own thing and like do your own project that just shows you're interested in personally. And that's always good material for your real portfolio. So
Fable, how would you describe Lackadaisy as a production? How many artists contribute to it? What kind of animation are you producing? And what does your production pipeline more or less look like?
Well, right now we're like in between some phases on our production, so our total head count is more than it would usually be. But I'd say that at our height, during the season production, we've had something like 30 people staff. During the pilot, we actually had like even more people, but we were also had less money, and so a lot of people when they were working with, were just doing like one or two bits of work. So we had more people on staff. But the goal for us has always been to like have stable employment as much as possible, with like rates that are like comparable or at the same level as studio rates. But yeah, if we've been either like if we're in like the hunting phase where we're working on scripts and stuff like this, the crew is going to be very, very small, and you're definitely not spending as much money then. But in production, and you need a ramp up, you bring on a lot more people, and you're trying to get both backgrounds done at the same time as animation getting done, and like you would have been doing storyboards already, those would have been finished. But sometimes what happens is that while people are working on the production side of like one episode, you are also preparing materials for future episodes, like character design, sets, boards, putting together radio plays and that kind of thing, and doing as much preparatory work as you can while people are making your first episode. And that's a technique called waterfall. In production, where you have like different teams of people like all working like kind of the same time, and the reason why it's called waterfall is if you showed everything out in an Excel sheet, it shows like this step. You'll see like backgrounds is going for this long, it's going for this long, boards are going for this long, and so on the line, so like all flows. And that way you can control how people you're working with, once, how much you're spending per week, per month, and you have a good understanding of like what time range lines you need to set for your team. And when it comes to it's like timing, scheduling is everything. Like the amount of time you spend on things is your budget, basically. So like if you have less budget, then you basically have less time, because there's only little that you can afford to pay people, especially when you're working at a certain level in animation. Like if you're just one guy who is making like a short of your own, and you have like a couple people working with you, you guys are probably either you're doing like work trades where you're like, hey, I'll help you out with this, and then you help me out with my production, and you're like, okay. Or like kind of giving people like some stipend to help you out. Because usually something like that, it doesn't have like a huge budget unless somebody has like saved up a bunch of money. Like I know that Nick Corleo on all the Hoops actually, like, you know, the money he made in studios, like he had like a bunch of savings and he's put into that. So that's like his passion. And then in other cases, you know, people have crowd funds like us because we individually don't have much money. But we can ask the public, hey, if you're interested in this, please help us out. And on top of that, there's, of course, like Patreon and any kind of like long-term funding. And all those things help determine like how long you can work on things, how many people you can hire at the same time. But yeah, like scheduling, making sure you don't have like a ton of people working at once, not making people just kind of sit around, and being mindful of their time. Is really, really core to controlling like what you are doing. So, and yeah. So it's turning production and creativity into a big math problem. So you get really good at building calculators in Excel, basically. So.
Yeah, one of the challenges that people have when they start a production is often that like the reason why they want to go independent is because they want to have more control of what they're doing. They want to focus more on their craft. And then you wind up having to do a bunch of things that do not involve the craft of animation directly, but involve managing a production. How did you learn how to manage a production? Did you have mentors or do you have like prior experience?
Well, it's that's the advantage of having worked in the industry space. Like my goal as a person in animation was never to go work for Disney. And it's like, to me, they were just you could get money from. Not that there aren't amazing work there, and that wouldn't be a good job, like mind you. That wasn't like a personal. That's my dream is to go work for Disney. More like my But the way I viewed it was I want to go work for a bunch of different places and, get as much experience as I can in as broad a field as I can because I do want to make my own things one day. And I felt that, good or bad, you can learn a lot from just working with other people, which is one reason why I encourage people to work together, even if it's like some tiny little, what you might think of as another project, but you gain a lot of experience from that. And even if it goes horribly wrong, you learn what not to do if you can identify why it went horribly wrong. It's actually one reason why I'm always fascinated by bad movies. Not because, oh, look at these guys who made just something terrible, haha. But I like to kind of like detective way into figuring out why did it turn out like that. If you can kind of break down how the production was structured by looking at something that was badly put together, you can kind of figure out what not to do, or problems that are really easy to run into. Because a lot of times, the problems that hit like a bad are problems that are going to hit anybody, such as like running over budget or running over schedule, or making higher versions that maybe were not ideal, or just not being very good at managing yourself, which is another really core. Like, you can't manage other people, you can't figure out how to manage yourself. So all these things that are really common issues, and if you can kind of how would I resolve that problem? Like, what kind of leader do I want to be on a project, and what my role is? It can smooth over a lot of issues, but fundamentally, you're going to have problems, and your job as a problem solver, that's what you're going to be. So you have to anticipate and plan for problems that just be part of production. And figure out how I want to react to that. And making that not everybody else's problem, or everyone else is just messing up, and not me. Oh, I would never mess up. But you're in a position to do something about stuff. Yeah, you're gonna have to figure it out. Sorry if I get really tangentially off topic. I've not had my coffee yet. I'm just naturally this way, so sorry.
I think that's a good point too. I mean, talking about what you can learn from productions that go a little bit off the rails. Like, one of my favorite documentaries in animation is the Waking Sleeping Beauty, which is following Disney's turnaround from the 1980s to the 1990s. it's a fascinating film. And I just think there's so much that you can learn about like productions. It kind of also like was very prescient too about like the current state of the animation industry, because like that's a time where Jeffrey Katzenberg just joined Disney, and like everything that happened afterwards kind of like set the stage for like where the animation industry was afterwards. It's very like Don Bluth is there momentarily in a couple of scenes. It's wild. I wanted to ask you, how has your approach to writing production changed from Lackadaisy's pilot to the series?
Mostly, the change has been the result of just knowing through production, like notice where there was choke points. At times it was just manpower, like I had so many hats on, and anytime you're wearing like a dozen hats, that means that you're a choke point, and that can be a problem. But also like post production, like well, not post production is a stage production technically. After the production, we did something called a post-mortem, where I asked like the various team leads and like crew members and stuff, and I was like, hey, give me your feedback on how production went. And I don't want to hear about like how this went well. I mean, that's helpful. Sure, you want to know what went well so you can repeat that, but also you want to know where were you having problems? Where's there friction? And you get feedback from people, and you do that for every production. And it's not that you can make the next production perfect, but if you can smooth over each of those things, it means that next post-mortem, you're going to have even more information. And you keep doing that, and you keep doing that, and you get better, and you get better. And you start seeing and narrowing down like where there are consistent issues you could do about this or that. You figure out like what is a you problem, and if it's a you problem, it's the most solvable thing. It's like it might be an ego hit, but actually it's super solvable because it's you, and so you have immediate control over it. But sometimes it's like a budget or a schedule thing, and okay, well, I obviously have to update my calculator to take these things into account. But most of the time, it's just like how much support people have, how much support people have, how easy is it to get materials, what kind of friction are they encountering in their work, and trying to smooth it the best you can. And that's how you start building a pipeline more robust. And that's actually one reason why it's useful to learn from existing productions, because, sometimes you might go, oh, well, there's like this or whatever, but there usually isn't like any given position that doesn't exist for like an action, and that's because studios spend a lot of time like doing basically the same thing, and every studio has to go through some cycle of this. And if they have any modicum of success, they have like their system pat. Sometimes in the course of production, like there'll be monkey wrenches thrown in. If a specific executive with just like a lot of just throw the whole thing in, well, I mean that's going to cause a problem. But crew members typically know how to do their job. They know what they want to do. Hey, buddy. You see my little man back there. And want them to be able to do their job as smoothly as possible. So yeah, I'd say just know that feedback is not a thing to shy away from. It's like you should be eager for feedback. Same as if you got notes from your boss while you're working on a project, and you're like, okay, I want to get this done, like get it up to what the client and my boss's expectations are, so it can be the best it can be for this production. Same thing for the productions. Like I want to get the best it can be for the audience, but also for the crew, because if the crew's not having good, it doesn't translate into a good entertainment for people. Because I do feel that the public can smell problems in a production to some degree. If the artists are not having fun at some level, it doesn't communicate to the final product. So people like to see artists having a good time. Like they jump on stage in a production and everybody's miserable, you're going to feel it. Even though we work in a field where it's not contemporaneous, it's not being produced right in front of your eyes, you're still, because it gets in there. And I think that's one reason why like silly little doodles that people just like jot out, spontaneously for fun, seem to do better than like super labored painting that like hundreds and hundreds of hours into, and then you put it online, and you're like, I suffered for this, and then it doesn't do well. I think on some level, maybe part of why is because you suffered for it. It's you having fun. Can people detect that you're home with this or that? That's a more complicated conversation, but yeah, it's such a stressful process that like the smoother you can make it, the easier it is to just relax into what you do, and just like relax into painting or animating or writing or boarding or whatever, so that the stress is just natural stress, part of the process, as opposed to I hate my job stress. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you had to, putting aside like whether or not you can make like great art while having fun, if you had to torture people to make like compelling entertainment, is it worth it?
yeah, and like I don't know what was. It's like, okay, I mean, you squeezed blood from a stone, but why? And like, I get that the motivation can be funny, but also there's like other ways to make it where that doesn't involve tormenting artists. So why? Because I don't enjoy tormenting people. I like tormenting fictional characters, but they're not.
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, it's like those jollies out on fiction, not real people. It's like, it makes me sad.
So, Lackadaisy is a production that partnered with Iron Circus early on. Originally, they were a comic publisher which started by crowdfunding anthologies like Smut Peddler, Sleep of Reason, and FTL Y'all. What led your production to partner with Iron Circus, and what did they do to help support your production?
Well, they know how to run a crowdfund, and we didn't, so that was a big. There's so many aspects to crowdfunding that until you get some experience or like you study up on it, it's very difficult because there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of like highs and lows, and you can panic the entire time, and you have to do a lot of preparatory work. Like over at Iron Circus, like they don't just when you see something launch, they didn't just work on the launch like last week, working on it for months, sometimes a year ahead of schedule. And especially if I'm offering products in association with crowdfund, that makes it even way more complicated, because you have to know where that product is coming from. You have to source. You have to have had like a lot of discussion. How much is this cost? How much is it going to cost to ship? How much does it cost to ship to the, to the backers? How do you store it? All those things can complicate stuff. So yeah, anybody who's going to do fun, minimize the physical materials that you're sending out as much as possible, unless the fun is that physical material, in which case you would have been doing this already. But yeah, the knowing what to anticipate is a big part of it. But another reason that we worked with Iron Circus is just this project was a hard sell for other studios. We pitched it to different places, and we had people who looked and they're like, this is really cool, but I don't know how we sell this, because while it's a little better now, and which I'm very grateful for, at the time when we were pushing this around and like talking to people in like 2019, there really wasn't anything like this. And most of adult animation is going to be like Family Guy-esque stuff, or it's going to be anime-esque stuff. And anime is usually just licensed, This is neither. How do you sell that? And that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to get stuff produced, is that you have to have people who are willing to buy it, networks who are interested in picking it up. And you could say, oh, well, there's all these streaming services. They'll do anything. And it's like, yeah, but out of possible buyers, you have like 15 possible buyers, and only 2 of them might be willing to take this. The safest bet is to focus on projects, pump, your money in projects that you could potentially sell to 15 different people, not just 2. because prices go up. So that was just the reality. And out like established stuff out there where like, slowly people are chipping away, like not just us, but like other projects, like going back decades. People have been away at this, trying to get interesting things made. And every time someone succeeds, it sets the fields for like people to go and have a try, because networks become more and more open to the possibility. Simpsons set the seeds for things like Family Guy, and South Park set the seeds for like Hotel, or like Scavenger's Reign came out, and that's freaking incredible. But you would never have seen something like that like years ago. There's something called it was like Pantheon on Netflix that I adore. It's like my kind of sci-fi. Just wouldn't have existed prior. Something like that might not have existed without something like Castlevania, which made like serious drama, in animated form, more viable and like incredible. Is not incredible. Invincible is out now, and that makes it more viable for more adult comic books to come out. That's not just aimed at 12-year-olds. So everybody's away at this problem. So I'm thankful for everyone who has been getting at that. But yeah, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell. And I ran away from the question. What was the question? It was why Iron Circus.
The question was initially like what led you to partner with Iron Circus, but I do think that's an interesting point too. That like the genres and audiences that are being catered to is a little bit broader than it used to be, which I think is really interesting.
And the advantage with Iron Circus is that they try to be at the bleeding edge of that, where like Spike Trot was kind of paying attention to who is the underserved niche, like what are people that they're not currently getting, a much different approach than other things. And of working in comics, like the threshold for doing more experimental is much lower. So she's used to looking out for that kind of thing, but also she's familiar with Lackadaisy, like having been involved in the comics world for a while. So when I went and pitched it to her at a comic that she went to, Comic Arts LA, like we already knew of each other. I knew of her more than she knew of me, but she definitely knew Lackadaisy. And I pitched what we were working on. She was like over the moon. She was like, yeah, no, I know that'll do well. Versus other people that I was pitching to where they knew it was going to be a really huge and unlikely uphill battle to convince their superiors that this was worth investing. Even if they personally knew that comics would do well as something adapted into animated entertainment. A lot of the people of them, especially at the time, were like, what's a webcomic? So sometimes it's just timing, I'm 37 now, but when we started working on this, like I was like 32. So there's levels like in positions of power at that time. And like millennials are very familiar with what webcomics are because like our internet youth was consuming that stuff, and for many of us still is. And you also don't have to get into anybody younger than us what this is, but for like Gen X and above, they're like, what's a webcomic? Unless they're already deeply involved in X, it's just not owned by the broader public. So yeah, not to say that it's exclusive to our generation, but just it's much more niche above us. So whoever you can reach out to who's going to be effective, you have those conversations with them. It's not just pitching to her and seeing who picks up. It's knowing who might be receptive and having a conversation. Are they happy to help you out? What are they willing to trade? What are you going to trade for their help also? Because in some cases, like you might be selling your soul. And by soul, I mean full control, and it never actually gets to see the light. Is a sadly common story for a lot of like things that I talk about, which I know of, where people are like, whatever happened to that? Were we just scammed out of blah? And I'm like, well, the story is much sadder than you would think. But but yeah, a lot of projects end up like that, where they might go through development, never see the light of day. Either the mergers or the person who was backing the project just got hired on somewhere else. New guy comes in, wants his projects in, so that happens. But yeah, you need people who believe in your project and are like really enthusiastic about it, like up to like the highest levels, in order to get anything done. So just having people have faith in what you're working in is very, very important. But yeah, so like big props to Spike for like understanding what the potential of this was, and being willing to her company's name behind us, which secure faith in people, because they were like, well, we know that Iron Circus like makes good on the starters, so we can afford to go, well, let's take a chance on this. Not only did have its own sizable audience at the time, but it was able to grow it based on that. So they advertised the hell out of it, and Spike has a lot of creative freedom, and I try to I to maintain that faith as much as possible. And so even after the pilot was done, I was like, I want to adjust what we're doing here, because I'm sure that any issues we ran into were like we did overrun budget, because like the project ended up a lot longer than we anticipated. That happened without first having conversations with her about it, and she was like, I have faith that it's gonna go somewhere, be something big, and I want to see this through. So she was willing to work with us through that. But I wanted to make sure that on future stuff that we didn't run into those same problems. So it was I wanted to resolve any of that and get a lot building my calculator and understanding how much effort it's going to make a production, and like all the problems that pop up, and accounting for that. So yeah, thank you, Iron Circus, for that, for that faith. I really appreciate it. It was a great experience. So yeah.
Just a quick tangent. You mentioned like webcomics and how like our generation really grew up on webcomics. Aside from Lackadaisy, what are some of the like big webcomics that had an influence on you?
Let's see. I'd say one of the biggest was I was co-artist on Blackblood Alliance, which is one of those OG DeviantArt Wolf comics. I worked with Kadoa very closely, doing layout and backgrounds, and with writing sometimes. And that was probably the biggest influence, because I was working on it since I was like 18, or years and years, like throughout college. I was poking at that, and even post-college, when she did a little reboot. Yeah, I mean, that was hugely influential. I'd say other comic influences I have, Calvin and Hobbes. Although that was in newspapers, but that was a big one. Another newspaper comic was Far Side, that definitely my sense of humor, the kind of like surreal, absurdist humor. But that I've read online where they just kind of have stuck in my mind. I liked how Kevin and Kelly weird one. I don't know if anybody knows that comic, but it's the style of the newspaper comic. But then it still starts to kind of meander in directions. Like it starts kind of like there's like a wolf and a rabbit that hook up, and they have like a shared family together. And the story is about navigating like prey relationships. This is all pre-Zootopia, by the way. So that narrative. There's also the works Dave Willis, who's currently doing Dummying of Age. But Dummying of Age is actually features characters that existed in prior comics he made. Like he would reboot the universe and explore these characters at like different ages or different places or whatever. And Dummying of Age has been his longest running, I think, series featuring them. And now it's these guys going through college where he just knows the characters super well and wants to explore the kind of a more slice of life way. And I really admire like his dedication over the years to just life. Like he has twins right now, and like I was reading comics from when he was like, I think like just in college himself, and now he is like, and seeing how his writing has evolved and his art has evolved since then is really cool when you follow some really long time and see what direction they go in. But like a lot of comics I read are just like, you know, handfuls of books here and there from really cool artists that maybe don't even have like a series like fully fleshed out, or they're just working on like world building and stuff. And I just love seeing people be creative, and even if it doesn't really go anywhere ultimately, a good time, a really good time on the way. So it's hard to talk about everything I could have possibly given me, because so many of them are like only 10 pages long, stick in my head. The art or like what they were working with is just so interesting. So it's just like as opposed to like 3, you know, sources of inspiration, it's like I'm just like 3 out of like a pile of hundreds, thousands. So who stands out there? It's like well, first we got to narrow down where and when and what's and in what way. So it's hard for me to talk about my influences like that. But yeah, but otherwise, I'd say that my biggest influences would be just reading books. Like I read a lot of books as a kid. You know, I watched a lot of TV and stuff too, but mostly just reading books because I was always really interested in how people would like juggle like a world or like an ensemble or tackling certain subjects, and just like where the threshold for making a comic is a lot lower than making a cartoon. You know, that's also true of a book where like the threshold for making a book is even lower. I remember reading Animorphs and just really liking how Applegate wrote about a story about characters, basically, where it was not, hey, isn't this? It was, wow, war sucks. And I, you know, not too long ago, I went back and I was like reading some stuff, and I was like, well, that actually holds up really well. And I was kind of shocked at how much her writing had actually influenced like my own writing style and philosophy in some way, without me ever having like thought about it too hard. So yeah, books are big influence, huge. But yeah, I would recommend anybody who wants to get into cartoons by way to look beyond cartoons for influence. It's like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cartoons, but there's just so many fewer cartoons than there are comics, and fewer comics than there are books. And there's fewer fiction, there's less fiction than there is real life experience. So, you know, broaden your experiences as much as possible if you want to just explore all the possible solutions to creative problems that you might run into, much less production problems, so that you have something to pull from that can help another tool that maybe somebody else built, or cobble together a new tool from tools that other people built. So, yeah. You know.
Yeah. Fable, when we last spoke with you, you just launched a partnership with Glitch Productions to create the Lackadaisy shop with custom plushies and merch to match the characters. Productions have been funded by toy sales for like a very long time. So do you see merchandise as a pathway to funding indie productions?
Yes and no. Where no, I'd say that really small things that don't have like an existing audience that you key are gonna buy things, I would not recommend getting into merch. At least not into like heavy amounts of merch, because you're gonna spend a lot of money and a lot of merch, and you might not get the returns you expect. You're also looking into like, well, what about like you know, print on demand type stuff? The returns on a poster from some Bubble are like in the less than $1 range. Like you could sell a $20 poster and you get like 50 cents. So it's, yeah, the returns on that kind of stuff are not great. So to make merch work, you have to really work at scaling. You have to work directly with manufacturers in order to have like the per unit price be low enough that you can sell for like double that and still have it be at a price point that like customers are willing to pay for, or even double that, because you want to pay off the price of the plush, future merch, and also have some left over for that's going to go into production. So you're looking at like 4 times the cost of the plush. So And then on top of that, you have to consider shipping and everything. And in the political climate, and this is it is really weird to get involved in merchandising when you do not know what the actual cost of the item is going to be. Like you heard me talking earlier about how everything is like budgeting, scheduling, and calculators, and when a new cost suddenly gets thrown into your budget that like makes the cost of these things go up by like 200% for no damn reason, let alone 20%, it really cuts into what your return is going to be on these things. And you might have been really counting on money. So like you need to make sure you have a customer base that is going to actually spend money on these things. You have to know what they want also. And you have to know what things are going to cost. And that's all. And you can't really acquire that data unless you already have done things that like allow you to accumulate data, which means years and years and years of building up an audience. If you're just starting out, don't fixate on merch. Just make things and make things at a reasonable rate you can produce them at. Don't look for Disney quality animation as your first thing. Like just start lower, because like you want to build up interest in your world and your project and your characters most importantly, and maybe people are willing to spend money on it. Initially, like when you're building an audience, like you can't count on merch. So it's going to be all you for a while. So what can you personally gain? So that's what a yes and no. It's like at a certain point, merch is very, very helpful. Like very helpful. There's a reason why for decades and decades, like a sustained a lot of animation business, Disney famously has a lot of money, selling toys and theme park experiences and that kind of thing off of the films they make. But you can't start there. Like they spent decades building up to that. Even if you look at like Disney himself and like how he built that company, they don't not the very polished version of him where it's like pop Disney. Like no, Disney is a businessman. Actual history Disney. Like look into what he did is very interesting, and if you look into like Katzenberg and like he can be a controversial figure, he's also very business minded, and he was thinking about how to make these films work in a way that is going to bring in enough money that they could be making stuff, because fundamentally he wants to keep going. And if you're not mindful of that kind of thing and you intend to pay other people to work on your thing, you're promising them like, hey, this is going to keep going for a while and you can count on this, and you're going to make the company stick around. So yeah, you just get like more concerns. Like if you're funding like a studio worrying about one project, you have to be mindful of the concerns of like the people who work for you, which means that it has to keep going. So you have to think about how do I make this sustainable. You have to think about how do I get data, how do I start, do I get data that I can build on top of, that I can help me know what my audience wants so that it's worth it in this or that thing. And over time you can start expanding. But like you might have noticed our March, like, and this is just like a sampling of what we put out, but the first things that we put out were we knew this character is very popular, he's going to sell, so we know that we can afford to get a certain number of units and that they will sell out, or there'll be very little stock left over. But like a more minor character who will have fans, we love them very deeply, but we know that merch of that character is not necessarily so well. Like Horatio is a sweetheart, but how many like Horatio fans are there? And I know you exist, but 20 is not enough as opposed to thousands. So you
dozens
have
of
to
us,
make dozens. So yeah, you have to make decisions that are make sense for what you want to do. What are your goals? And the goal in this case is not to make merchandise. Merchandise is an engine to help make more cartoons that help sustain people's work. So my job is dependent on being mindful of these other things, and have my creative side, like what I would like to do, just as a creative person, but how do I translate in such a way that communicates to my audience what they need to know, and gets them attached to what you're working on, and then if they are interested enough in it, then they might buy merch, for which I'm very grateful. But yeah, you need data, and you need years of data, and like none of this is like a get rich scheme where like by next have millions of dollars, because that's not really possible unless we started with millions of dollars. So yeah, it's tough. If you start from basic and build up from there, it's gonna take a long time. It's gonna take anywhere from 5-10 years, something like that, more, and things go good, it's going to be because you set the stage for good things to happen. Also luck, you never know something very good or very bad is going to happen, and it takes time. And I've said to people, this is a craft, and decades of your life, on a craft, there's no point, and the same is true of like anything you're going to build up. So I just mentioned earlier that I got out of school and I was just trying to make a career for myself, just trying to get like work coming in from just me alone, and what it takes to do that, let alone then bouncing off and like doing a whole production. But like, if I had all that experience beforehand, I've been able to do production later on. Like 22-year-old me would not have been able to handle this. They would have done their best, but they handle it at this level and with all the complications that I've faced on this. And so I'm grateful I didn't get lucky much sooner. I wish certain things happened a lot sooner. It would be great if like I had my house right now, but I'm in the same boat as a lot of other Americans and like people around. So I'm not any more special in that regard, at least. So.
Fable, is there anything that you wish you knew before the Lackadaisy Kickstarter 5 years ago?
5 years ago, I wish that I had known how long it would be based on the length of the script that we wrote. That you generally work on a page a minute. I now know that the length of time that ours tend to translate to somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of a minute per page. At the time when I was on the pilot, I had it in my head that half a page, that a page equals like half a minute, and I should have known better, or I didn't know better at least. And we did have an 18-minute cut of the production, but it was so breathless that I needed more time. It ended up expanding itself into like 27 minutes. So yeah, I wish I had reined it in a little bit, because it made production go less smoother. I probably could have saved myself a year of time on the production had I been more aware, and that would have been great. That would have been great. A year of time, and that means that more money. And so maybe it worked out, but also rough, and I wouldn't want to put myself through it again. So yeah, be very mindful of how long it's really gonna be. If you're like, I'm gonna make a 5-minute short, and you write 20 pages, that's not a 5-minute short. Sorry, it's not. So really don't be so ambitious that you end up creating future problems yourself. Like it's called feature creep in game production, and the same thing happens in animation. Really try to rein it in, because it's going to be a much bigger job than you think. Again, like I said, you have to account for all the problems you're going to face. So don't make it on purpose for yourself down the line. So yeah, that I wish I.
What do you hope to see more of from the animation industry in the future?
I mean, more variety. I would like to see. Fundamentally, I want to see more small and medium pop up, because I think one of the problems that we have right now is that, at least as a career, there's a lot of big studios, but a lot of the small studios just went extinct after the 2000. So it used to be a lot more like little boutique studios working on tiny projects, and a lot of that just evaporated at that time. And so nowadays it's like, oh, you want to get work. It's like, well, there to even work for. And right now you have like micro studios that doing like little indie productions, or you have like the major studios, and there's not a whole lot of in between. And I want to see more of the small, medium-sized things come back, and I want to see projects like that also. It's like so that, you know, like I've seen people say like, oh, you know, this thing like raised the bar, and god damn it, I can't do that, and now everybody's expecting things to look like this, and it's like, honestly, as a person who worked on this, I don't want that. I want to see more variety, like, you know, across the spectrum, just what people are doing, stuff that is also not just even like making ensemble castings like this where you can easily sell merch. I don't see like more horror. I want to see sad stories,
Yes.
personal stories. I want to see you know, animated documentaries, and I think that kind of thing is more possible. There is just a much more diverse ecosystem for people to you know, hook into, and I'm hoping for a future where we're not beholden to YouTube or wishing that we get picked up by like major networks and that's like basically it. I would like there to be a future where there's websites that are more specifically dedicated to small animation, so that we're not fighting convention on sites like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, et cetera, where vlogs about what I shopped for are just because they're easy to make, and audiences on those platforms are largely looking for that, and it's hard to get noticed. You're competing with just millions of hours of entertainment. Like, how do you get your thing to rise to the top? And you could take so much effort, and if you weren't competing with stuff like that, then it'll be a lot easier to find cartoons that you personally want to watch. So I would love for there to be like more sites that just like did things that you could see, like they just shared, hey, here's some meat I found. So it's not like competing with attention with a bunch of stuff. We can upload video, and you wouldn't get dinged for having public domain music, but it turns out it was sampled by some, you know, like pop song, and now you're getting like a copyright flag or whatever for something that you legally are able to use. And if that sounds like a ridiculous situation, that happens all the time, like all the time. Your own music gets flagged, and it's terrible. And then you're shifting standards on websites like YouTube, where it's like what isn't going to be allowed, what's allowed now that's not going to be allowed here. So they have contention with like when you say swears or now, and like the rules for what's allowed on YouTube are now stricter than what's allowed on TV. But like when YouTube started, it was a free-for-all, and so, you know, you have a lot of older YouTube videos now that are kind of like getting hidden or whatever because the standards have just changed, and it's really rough. It's rough to make something that's going to take a lot of your time and money and energy and build up a channel, only for it to all come down because just the rules changed and you know heads up, and the way it's applied to you is like in a strange way. Like, you don't know if tomorrow they're going to decide all cartoons on YouTube are actually for children. Anything that gets flagged as a cartoon is now for kids only, which means, you know, goodbye audience, basically. So you don't know if like you know, fictional violence is bad, and so like if you had like a blood running down like someone's nose or whatever, now that's bad. Or if, you know, we have gunshot noises in our thing. It's not like, you know, violent things are happening. We don't have like intention, but you don't know if they're going to decide, oh, well, the sound of a gunshot is now no longer involved, so you get demonetized. And while we're not really making money off of YouTube itself because the ad returns are just so low, that's another thing. Don't rely on YouTube for money. If you don't allow ads, they don't show your video as much, so you have to allow ads in order for the album to even really pick it up. So if you get demonetized, it's not about the money, it's about reach. In cases like us, that can be really hard. So I just want there to be more platforms. So more projects out there just doing any old thing, or studios with platforms more specifically. That's what I really want to see. So that there's more places you can put stuff up. And even if people like doing web brings like to where you just have a website that shares cool stuff you found. And so people have like some place to go and check stuff, every so often, like what's there today, a blog about that's pretty cool. You can do that. You can personally do that. But
it's very easy to make a website now.
Yeah. But as far as like where you can upload stuff, there's YouTube, there's Vimeo, and there's Newgrounds, and the shareability of YouTube is just stomps or two. But yeah, more video platforms would be fantastic. I know that this is not a problem that's unique to animation, though. Like I know Nebula exists, and that's like a lot of bread tubers sort of founded that, and it's a collective where they share, like when people subscribe to that service, like the money from those subs actually gets shared between like everyone who contribute to Nebula. And I think stuff like collectives, I would love to see more of that. There's like a collective for animation, or even like a few of those. That'd be really neat. So that there was a way to make direct money from your work. That's the other thing. Like I said, we're talking about merch, but that's not making money directly. You're not making money from people watching your stuff, and that's a problem. But if there was more platforms where for like $5 a year or $5 a month, or even a couple dollars a month, like I know Nebula is not that much. It's like for the cost of a burger, a year subscription to Nebula. But that money is going to the people making stuff at Nebula, at least. So this isn't an advertisement. This is just like I know some people who work there, so I've heard this, and I'm just using that example of what people are trying to do. But like, was it Dropout also exists as its own platform now?
Yeah. The Dropout was started by the former College Humor staff and crew.
Yeah, and like they have their own website where you can go and watch stuff. And people will use YouTube as advertise what you have and get them onto your site. And I think that that's more sustainable long term. Just, but it's like people nowadays expect they don't want to like. They're not interested in looking at it unless it already has like thousands of people behind it and tons of material.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that you don't get that unless you had like venture capitalists get like millions or billions of dollars right off the bat to dominate the sphere like in the first place. And I think as a lot of people realize now, that's not good. You don't want to be. You really want to found like the era of animation. You just shoo out all the competition. Maybe you do, but most of us can't afford, don't have access to that kind of money, and I kind of question it besides as a business plan. But yeah, I think that the future I want to see is one where people invest more in that kind of thing. And they invest more in small stuff and keep growing it and finding like long-term stability. So you're interested in immediate success. You're just interested in a future for what you're making, like that it will exist like decades into the future instead of just being the flash in pan of like this month. So that's what I want to see, and so like you dropping your work into an ocean with, or it's a tiny little puddle, and so you dominate, but there's not much there. I'd like to just a bunch of lakes and ponds. It's just more interesting fish in each one. So yeah, metaphor is starting to run away with me, but yeah, that's kind of where hope is go. And I see signs of it, and I just want to encourage that where I can, because yeah, I don't think that every project that people put out there, like if your goal is to get picked up by like Amazon or Netflix or whatever, because there's very few people for one that's going to be true. There's a lot of projects that are going to be online, even if they were super duper cool, just because that's my birds. Girls. Yeah, I hear you. You good?
Well,
I know they're hungry. They wanted to get their lunch.
Since we're talking about platforms and we're running out of time, I wanted to ask you, where can our audience go to learn more about Lackadaisy as well as your own work on the web?
There's Lackadaisy.com where you can go and see the webcomic itself. And that gets updated. LittleDaisyCafe.com is another option, although that doesn't. That's like the production blog, but it hasn't been updated in a minute. It does so, but you know, we update every like few months, for instance, just to kind of give people like a place where they can kind of see a sum of everything we're working on over the last like handful of months. And of course, is our YouTube. So if you just search Lackadaisy on YouTube, you'll find it. But the channel name is, excuse me, the channel name is Lackadaisy Comic. If you need more specific, right up if you just search Lackadaisy. Like there's, it's clearly dominant in that category. It's like very useful SEO. It's easy to find as long as you can spell, and that's probably a challenge. Yeah, so those are good places, and of course you can always keep track of more get updates on Blue Sky. That's where we saw it. So you search Lackadaisy on Blue Sky. I think it's. I can just double check if it's Lackadaisy or something else. Let me find Tracy's account 1 second. Wait, is there like a tag to that? Yeah, it's just Lackadaisy on Blue Sky. Sometimes she uses cats because Lackadaisy got used, but you know, you end up on a platform early enough and you can just nab the name. But yeah, Lackadaisy on Blue Sky. I myself am Fable Paint on Blue Sky and talking about my work, and also posting pictures of cats or doing that kind of thing. But yeah, that's a good space to see because Tracy's always like people with updates there. And of course, there's like the Patreon for Lackadaisy, so check that out. That has like some behind the scenes updates. Yeah. And there's also Tumblr. If anybody's using Tumblr and you want like questions of Tracy, like she has an ask box.
Heck yeah.
It's flooded, but like she answers people. You know, if it's like an interesting enough question, like she answers people. So the opportunity to like crack a joke is always welcome. So yeah.
So, Fable, I just want to thank you so much for joining us to give us a peek into the speakeasy behind Lackadaisy. And I also want to thank our audience for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, I'd recommend watching the Lackadaisy pilot as well as the mini episodes that are on YouTube. They're excellent. And for anyone who's interested in developing their own indie animated series, artists can download a 21-day free trial of Toon Boom Harmony from our website. The website is toonboom.com. Next week, the Toon Boom team will be in Annecy. So if you're attending the festival or MIFA, feel free to drop by our booth. Thank you all for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.
All right. Egg or break a leg, whatever helps you get through.